I'm up on Snape's Point now, which is a little headland that sticks out on the Salcombe estuary. We've got Salcombe town in the background there, and down on the other side of the camera here, the estuary carries on around, and there's some nice boats and things there. Great morning, the sun's up now, so it's lighting up the buildings across here. All the frost and stuff is started to melt off now, but it's looking good. I'm here to shoot some panoramics this morning. So first and foremost, composition. What I look for in a composition. I like panoramic format wise. I like the 6x17 look, which is quite a long, thin sort of letterbox shape. So I try and sort of like look for subjects that fit within that. You can see here we've got the buildings behind us. I'll show you in a bit the composition on the back of the camera there, which I've chosen. There's some nice gorse here, some nice colour to pick out. But generally a nice sort of letterbox shape through here. I've shot here before with a panoramic camera years ago, so I know this kind of works, this location. In terms of practicality of shooting, obviously I'll go through the different steps in a bit, but generally you want to get your composition right first, make sure you've metered everything for the light, set the camera up, do a couple of test runs first, make sure it's working, the composition's working, and away you go. So we'll have a look at the back of the camera now, and I'll show you the frame shot, the sort of central bit of the picture that I want to capture, and then I'll go through the steps of how to shoot for the panoramic, and then later on in Lightroom I'll show you how to blend it all together and stitch the panoramic together and finish the shot. Okay, here we've got the main sort of part of the picture that I wanted to capture. This is the main viewpoint, if you like. Got some nice yellow gorse here, and the light's nice and bright on the buildings across in Salcombe town. We've got the water there, and it's lighting up the grass. So it's a nice shot there. That's the centre frame, if you like. As I turn the camera around, you can kind of see. I'll start from around there, pan around, and then end up with these boats in the distance here. See those there, just on the right hand side. That'll be the end of my panoramic. Now, in terms of how to shoot a panoramic image, there's two ways you can do it. One, you can shoot like this horizontally, which is what I'm going to do here. The second way is to tilt the camera up on its side and shoot in portrait format. Generally, if you shoot in portrait format, you'll end up with more images. Normally, for a scene like this that I've just showed you, you're looking at about between 7 and 9 images. Whereas if you shoot this way in horizontal format, landscape format, you'll get between sort of 3, 4, maybe 5 images, depending on how wide you want to shoot. Now, obviously, when you're shooting, you've got to keep the camera level in between each shot. There are panoramic heads available, but they're very expensive, and to be honest, with the software capabilities these days, you don't really need to spend hundreds of pounds on a panoramic head. You're far better off when you're in shooting mode like this, is to try and get them as level as you can, and then obviously in the stitching software everything can be sort of leveled out then. But as a general rule, when you're shooting, on my camera, this is in live view at the moment. I press the info button. Now I've got a levelling device inside the camera in this one. Not every camera's got this, but you can see that when I get the camera level, you get the green line there. It's very sensitive, but it's pretty good. It's pretty accurate. Alternatively, you can use a bubble spirit level on top of the camera, which I used to use quite a lot, especially with film cameras back in the day. But like I said, this little device here is great. And again, press the info button again, and I bring up my live histogram. Now, while I've got the histogram up, let's talk about filtration. Now, when you're shooting panoramics, as you're sort of spinning through the image, taking all the different shots. Now, if you think in terms of filtration, One filter to kind of steer clear of is a polarizer, because if you're using wide lenses, a polarizer tends to, it's got a tendency to give you an over colorization in the sky, almost like a band of colorization that's not even. Now as you go through the image, this is very noticeable between each image, and you almost get like a curtain effect. So polarizer is a no-no basically. I do tend to use grads. I've got a 2-stop grad on here at the moment, and you can see if I put my image back there. Now at the moment the histogram's fairly split. You've got a bright sky and it's quite sort of dark in part of the foreground there. And if I put my grad down, you can see that colour in the sky up, but also look at the histogram. See the shape of the histogram changing? Now about there, that gives me a nice exposure with all the mid-tones, highlights and shadow detail within range. Now as I go through and shoot my panoramic, you'll notice that this, obviously as I move the camera around, the camera does tend to sort of, it goes at a lower point to the right hand side. So each time I shoot I'm going to have to correct that that difference. Now obviously once I correct that difference I'm going to have to adjust the graduate filter, otherwise I'm going to have a grad line cutting right through. So that's just to bear in mind. So now we've got our composition, filtration in place and exposure right, I can carry on and start shooting through this image now, and we'll see what that turns out like. Now in terms of focal length for panoramics, I tend to use a wide-ish lens most of the time. The previous composition I did just now was a 17 to 40 lens, zoomed into about 35-40 mil. But I do tend to use a longer lens if I can. You can see here on this shot that I've got my 70 to 200 on. 70 mil is zoomed pretty much as close as I'd want it. If I go any further, it's going way too close to the subject. Now, when you stitch panoramics together, if you want, say, the sky in the shot and the foreground here as well, you've got to bear in mind that depending on how many shots you take, you might get some distortion, especially with wider lenses. So it's always worth shooting a little bit wider than you need to when you're actually taking the frames, to allow for some cropping later on in Lightroom or Photoshop. Just something to bear in mind. I have done some longer telephoto stitches before. Here's a few examples. To this higher viewpoint now. You can see down over in the estuary there. It's a great shot from up here as well. This is just well, the opposite side to where I was earlier. The sun's quite high now, so it's getting to the point where it's getting a little bit too high. But at this time of year, I mean, we're in December now. Generally, the sun stays fairly low in the sky all day, so it's not too bad. So I've got probably another half an hour or so of light before it gets too harsh up here. So I'm going to try another panoramic here. This time you'll notice the camera's in portrait mode. I'm using a slightly longer lens, using my 70 to 200. It's zoomed in about 70 mil at the moment. So again, I'll show you the composition up close in a minute, and pan through the image so you can see. and then we'll process this one as well, and we'll see what this comes out like. Right, here we go. This is the first frame, if you like, on my my left hand side of the Panoramic. It's worth noting as well that with exposure metering, I tend to use manual exposure when I do these. So as you go through the image, you can see here, as I spin through, you'll obviously see the light changes. The sun's off to the right hand side of me, so obviously the closer to the sun you get, the brighter the image is going to be. So you've got a risk of overexposure in this case, in manual exposure. So you need to be aware of that. So I tend to take my meter reading from basically the brightest point of the image, and then work back from there. Generally, that works. That covers all the exposure range. Gives me enough information there to correct things later on. If you're struggling with a huge variation in exposures, you can shoot multiple exposures. So for each shot, say this one here, 1, 2, 3 pictures, all at different exposures to cover the dynamic range. You do that for each picture. You end up with a lot of pictures in a huge file, but obviously once it's all merged together and blended, you can do this without filtration, and not having to worry about the light being brighter in one part of the image or darker in another. Again, this shot here I've used a graduate filter, and again as I turn around you'll see that the grad line does tend to cut into the hillside there as I go round, because the camera's dropping to the right hand side. So it's just a case of adjusting that. So I'll shoot this one now, and let's have a look, see what this one looks like. Okay, here we are in Lightroom. I've got my main source images up on the film strip in the Develop module. I then select all these. I go to Photo, Photo Merge and Panorama. Make sure spherical is selected and wait for Lightroom to create the preview image. Okay, here we go. This is the preview. You can notice these white lines around the outside. These have resulted from irregularities when shooting the Panoramic. These can now be cropped out at the next stage. So we click Merge, and here we have our final Panoramic. Now with cropping, I'm going to show you a quick crop on this one. So we're going to the crop tool. We've got two options here. You can either choose preset crop sizes. However, some of these Panoramic ones are 16:9, for instance, are a little bit too small for what I need. So I go back into the original size. Using my aspect tool here, I can basically crop in manually whilst maintaining the original aspect of the picture. When I'm happy with this one, just click enter, and away you go. Okay, that just about wraps it up for today. Great morning. It's winter's definitely here. My face is all numb. Got a Donald Trump going on. Pursing lips. Oh, it's freezing. I'm going to get back to the car now and get back and process these pictures. My next blog is going to be about shooting architecture at night. So until next time, see you later.